Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Masterclass on Circular Economy with Rozita Singh. My name is Greg Findlay. I'm an instructor for Terra.do. And without further ado, I just want to welcome Rozita, and I'll let her take it away and tell us about herself and then start into her presentation. So thanks, Rozita. Welcome.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. This is Rozita. Good evening from India. I'm dialing in from New Delhi. Happy to be here. This is the third cohort for which I'm running this masterclass in circular economy. A little bit about myself. I like to call myself the green sheep of my family. So I've been working in the field of sustainability for over a decade now. Started working as a researcher, mostly on the topic of climate change adaptation and cities. So how can we make our cities more climate resilient? Moved on to work in the private sector for a very short duration of time on circular economy. That was in Philips in Netherlands. And then came back to India around 3 years back, currently working in United Nations Development Program as head of solutions mapping in the Accelerator lab network. So we work a lot on innovations around multiple topics related to SDGs. And today, of course, I'm back here with another edition of a masterclass in circular economy. And just to let you know, a caveat, this is quite a dense topic, very interesting topic as well. Difficult to cover it in the short duration of time, but I try to do my best in giving you a very nice snapshot or a crash course kind of a way of introduction to circular economy, its origin, key strategies and principles, but also a lot of examples and case studies. And of course, all the slides will be provided later. I have a set of reading material for those who want to take a deep dive into it. So lots of stuff is there. So don't worry about, taking screenshots and stuff because everything will be shared. So without further ado, I will just share my screen and Greg, you can let me know if you can see it well, because I won't be able to see the chat anymore. Okay, wait, something is... Okay, just a second. Okay.
And while we're waiting for this, folks in the Uriel's cohort, we will get into circular economy in the class as well in a few weeks, but we won't go as deep as Rozita will today. Can see that? Looks great. Thank you.
Okay.
And if you have questions, folks, you can post them in the chat.
Great. So we have, less than 1 hour with us. So what I would like to do, I don't want to talk the entire time. I will do it like a 50-50% kind of a thing, presenting the content first. And you can, of course, hold on to your questions, or if there's something very pressing, Greg can tell me to pause and I can answer that. But we do keep a very good discussion time, 25 minutes in the end. So don't worry about that. So today, to take you through, like I mentioned, there are just few topics that we need to see, subtopics within the circular economy ecosystem, and we'll be going through a set of these things, and of course, list of reading resources later on. To begin with, this circular economy concept, very important to discuss about the origin about it. So the origin actually comes from several disciplines, which is the beauty of this concept. So many of you might have been familiar and might have come across this book called Cradle to Cradle. So this was a concept introduced by German chemist Michael Braungart and American architect Bill McDonough, who developed this concept and certification process called Cradle to Cradle. And basically, this was a design philosophy which considers that all material are involved in industrial and commercial processes are of nutrients nature, and they can actually be divided into technical and biological cycles. So we'll be looking at that in a bit. And very important to mention, this term cradle to cradle actually came up in the late 1970s by Walter Stahel, and he actually developed this closed loop approach to production processes, and he actually created the Product Life Institute in Geneva. There are also some terms you might hear when you come across certain readings. namely, performance economy, abundance, biomimicry. That's also an interesting area that is drawn from it. Industrial ecology, of course. And then also important to mention here is the concept of regenerative design. So in the US, John T. Lyle, he started developing these ideas on regenerative design that could be applied to almost all systems. Beyond agriculture, because for agriculture, this concept already had been formulated. And he basically laid down a lot of this foundation for the circular economy framework. Later, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, in the last decade, really came in the knowledge sharing domain to kind of really widely publicize this topic, speak about it in the practitioners field. So you will find a lot of material by Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And very recently, there's something called donut economy, an interesting model that has come up, and I'll touch upon that also in a bit. So, really starting with this topic itself, why are we really hosting a masterclass on circular economy? Why do we even need to discuss it or look at it? So there are two things that have happened, in the last decades. Humanity has really breached two major milestones. One, the world is consuming 100 billion tons of material, and it is 1 degree warmer. So if you look at this report called Circularity Gap Report, it basically positions circular economy or a transition to circular economy as a method to mitigate climate change. And why do we say that? We say that because the report actually finds out that, all the material handling and use activities, that is combination of all those things that go into production and consumption, they actually account for 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions, which means that by applying circular economy strategies, you can not only increase value retention or cut the excessive consumption that is happening in the world, you can actually have the ability to slash emissions. And this is why this topic is so important. This report, you can go through it later on in detail. It really speaks about recommendations, very concrete recommendations in different sectors, including housing, mobility, where you can actually cut 39% of total global emissions and 28% of virgin resource use. So this was quite an interesting study. And of course, the number above is very dismal that the world is only 8.6% circular. So there is a long way to go here. Now, looking at these very simplistic, diagrams, and to speak about the definition per se, circular economy is essentially an alternative to linear take, make, waste model. And if you were to look at the principles, very simply put, it is based on three principles: designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So this means that, instead of resources being consumed and discarded, their value is actually retained by reusing, repairing, remanufacturing, upcycling, and recycling. So this is a very famous butterfly diagram of Ellen MacArthur Foundation that basically presents the concept of circular economy. And the first thing that most people notice about is the separation into the distinct halves or circles. So the left side, you see the biological materials represented in green cycles. And these are the materials that can safely re-enter the natural world, or, once they have gone through one or more use cycles. On the right side is what we speak about the material world, which is the technical materials. And these are materials like metals, plastics, synthetic chemicals. And these must continuously cycle through the system so that their value can be captured and recaptured, which is the essence of circular economy. Now, if you really, look at these inner loops, there are 4 or 5 levels or strategies that are proposed. So the innermost being the most preferred one. So the first strategy is really about maintaining or prolonging. So this means that this is the strategy of keeping products and materials in use by prolonging their lifespan for as long as possible. This can be done, through designing for durability, for instance, as well as for maintenance and repair. The next approach is called reusing or redistributing. What happens here is that these technical products and materials, they can be reused multiple times, and these are often redistributed to new users in their original form. So marketplace such as eBay or second-hand markets, where one product over a journey or duration of its life cycle goes into the hands and ownership of different owners, is a way of looking at how redistribution models can actually help in a circular economy world. The third important one, which some of you might have heard about, is refurbishing or remanufacturing. And this is where we kind of focus on the potential of the manufacturing industry to bring in a change, as they account for a lot of emissions as well. So this really means that by remanufacturing, you can disassemble a product, a good, to a component level, and you can simply do parts harvesting, replace certain components, and then you can make it into a new condition, as opposed to, say, extracting virgin materials and making a new product. So there are lots of examples here as well, and we will be looking at those examples. The last most one, which all of us have heard about, is recycling. And as we know, it's the process of reducing a product all the way back to its basic material level, allowing it to be remade into new products. But very important to mention here, there is a lot of loss of embedded labor and energy into it. So it is a low value process than those, say, closer to the center. And that's why we say that, we need to really look beyond recycling as the only option. We have to look at the other strategies as well. I will be sharing a detailed narrative on the diagram for those who want to take a closer look on what other loops means here, but just moving on in the interest of time. Again, taking a step back and looking at what led us to this situation. How come we are consuming 100 billion tons of material? How come our planet is warming to a great degree? What happened really in our world? So we all know that, industrial revolution, while it did a lot of good to our economy by bringing in many benefits, it also, led to a lot of production of waste and pollution. So it did raise the standards of living by having these mass production and consumption economies, but the downside was increased waste and pressure on the finite resources that we have. So the whole idea of the circular economy proposition is to really look at that, can we, while going on in our economic activities and running these economic activities in our world, is there a different way of doing business? Is there a different way of still producing the goods and services, but having a minimal impact on nature? And this is quite an interesting challenge to have, because we are used to centuries and centuries of ways of working in a typical linear model. And that's why this challenge really emerges. These are some of the videos that actually you can have a look at later. I'll only play one of them in a bit, just to take a break from me speaking. But these are very interesting videos that go a little bit more further about the concepts behind circular economy. Like we say about this term called performance economy. And in this video, they basically speak about, how many years do we have of these valuable materials to extract from the ground? Some estimates say for copper, it's maybe just 61 years left. For zinc, it might even be less, 40 years left. Now, these figures are not exact, but they basically are telling a story that the materials are finite, but our needs have become really more than that. And that's why the speed that we are using these materials has become exponential, and there needs to be a way of addressing this problem. Similarly, this is an interesting video by Stahel on the resource abundance by design. And, moving further, now you may ask that, okay, this is fine. This was the theory part of it. Fine. We looked at the origin. We looked at what impact industrial revolution had and the concepts behind CE. But where do we really see the applications? Well, positively, we see a lot of applications in a lot of industries. So it started with the textile industry, really, moving into the manufacturing industry, which is very key sector. The ones that, produce mass products or high volume domestic products like appliances, FMCG companies, say like Unilever, P&G, that produce your shampoo bottles to your detergent and oil bottle. We also have started speaking about circular economy in the building industry. Amsterdam, for example, uses its budget to make municipal buildings more circular. They have come up with this whole theory about creating material passports for the buildings, which means that you will get to know all the components, what has gone into the building, what was the asset, its value, and how can it be recycled or reused. Of course, food and beverage industry, and we have been increasingly becoming mindful about the food waste that the world is generating. So a lot of talk is happening there on how can we actually reduce that as well. I mentioned sometime before about the donut economy model, and it's very important to mention because this is the latest of the model that has come after Cradle to Cradle Say, and it's quite revolutionary. And it really looks at a very tangible, practical framework to apply the principles of circular economy at a city level. Now, very important to mention here, some of you might be aware, cities account for 85% of the global GDP generation, but they also account for a lot of waste that is created and 60 to 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. And the world, all over the world, if we see the pattern, urbanization rates are really, increasing. And that's why the need for a model had come up that how can we really adopt or look at city as a lens for applying circular economy. And very interestingly, as you all know, we have gone through a pandemic, we are still living in one, and we have started, this thought process that we need to start looking at our economy, not separately, but hand in hand with social justice and ecological well-being. So there is now more than the need ever to be, regenerative and inclusive while respecting the environmental boundaries of the planet. And this is a framework that really applies this practice. So in this framework, if you notice the outer circle, we have 9 environmental ceilings. These are based on the planetary boundaries. So beyond which unacceptable environmental degradation occurs. So examples are air pollution, biodiversity loss. In addition, if you look at the inner loop, there are 12 social foundations that are laid out. So focus on topics like education, health, even gender equality. And therefore, using the donut model means that the city needs to calculate the current impact, both in terms of these 9 environmental sectors and 12 social factors. And ideally, the city should lie in the sweet spot of the donut, which is environmentally safe and socially just. And the first city actually to recently announce that they will be adopting this model was Amsterdam during the pandemic. And they expressed this ambition that we need to be regenerative and inclusive city for our citizens. But there are a number of other city planners and urban planners and municipalities and mayors who have joined the pledge. You can actually visit this website and have a look. From Los Angeles to Paris to Seoul, Lisbon, Oslo. There are a number of cities part of the C40 Cities Alliance who have really pledged that they want to adopt this donut economy model in the coming years to really calculate their impact and then reduce their impact. And this all is linked to decarbonization, by the way. Like I said, circular economy has a very deep connection with climate change mitigation here. Now, moving on, we have seen some of the applications at a very macro level. I'll be giving some micro level examples as well. But some question that comes to our mind might be that, all this is fine, but if businesses need to go circular, will it be profitable? What are the drivers and business models? So we will be re-looking at this slide again after looking at some examples. But before that, I just wanted to play a small video to show you or for you to recognize or appreciate that there can be a different way of, buying and doing business. So I'll just play this video and let me know if there's any glitches in that. I hope not.
Availability is uncertain, and when prices
Some issue with that, just a second.
Our current linear economy relies on cheap, easily available resources and fossil energy. We take, make, use, and dispose, eating into a finite supply of materials and generating waste. What's more, resources and energy are getting increasingly tough and expensive to exploit. So can it work long term? This is where the idea of a performance-based circular economy comes in. What if we didn't buy the goods themselves, but the service? What if we favoured access and performance? In this model, manufacturers or retailers would remain the owners of the products. Maintenance and repairs becoming part of the deal. Even better if running costs, like electricity, were included. For companies, it makes sense to retain precious materials, when their future availability is uncertain and when prices are forecast to rise. Premature obsolescence would be phased out rather than designed in. Buying expensive goods up front would no longer be a necessity. It already happens with mobile phones and cars. Why not fridges, washing machines, power tools and so on? Of course, there is a wide variety of needs, of individuals, of businesses. This is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. Hundreds of different solutions can be designed with tailored contracts. Variety, freedom, flexibility and frequent upgrades. Take car-sharing schemes. We can either use vehicles owned by manufacturers, car-sharing companies, or sign up to a local person-to-person network. Communication technologies mean that our world is fast becoming a platform where we find, exchange services, or even remarket goods. It's all about access. And it works for homes and offices too. Couldn't a contract for a number of copies, or washes from a high-end appliance, be more beneficial for both providers and users? Better service at a better price. Companies win too. Materials extraction and production can represent up to 75% of the energy used to make goods. So if remanufacturing were introduced at scale, it would dramatically reduce our energy needs. At systems level, this would help the switch to renewable sources. A system that works long-term by designing out waste and keeping valuable products in the loop, and maintaining or remanufacturing them, creating jobs in the process. Shifting to a performance model is part of the solution when it comes to accelerating the transition to a circular economy. There's a world of opportunities for businesses as well as individuals, and the shift has already begun.
I hope that played well. And then just moving on. So, as the video said, there is a way of doing business differently. And I just wanted to give you 5 quick examples of the kind of business models or circular business models that can be clubbed or categorized. One of them is called the performance model, which means that the responsibility actually lies with the provider. Users are merely interested in the quality of the service. And one example of this comes from Philips. So Philips started this service called lighting as a service, where they started selling light as a service instead of the light fittings, which meant that Philips would even pay the electricity bill and the users would pay per use or pay as per a subscription plan, which means that Philips now has an incentive to even make the lights as efficient as possible. And then the consumer will pay a fee based on how many lumens they are using for how much duration of time. Moving forward, the second model is access model. So we saw car sharing examples. Similarly, many of you might be familiar with bike sharing models. So again, this is the provider is making money through providing access to the product, and by maybe aggregating the service or decentralizing the service in terms of provision. So bike sharing models where you have pickup points and drop-up points. So you don't again need to really own the cycle or that ride. You can just rent it for the duration of time that you need it. The third interesting model is about gap exploiter model. So we see this often in refurbishments. So typically when manufacturers were only giving new products, they were not able to, they were losing out a little bit of their business in terms of repair shop or second-hand equipment sellers. When they started taking this control point in their own hands by refurbishing machines, for instance, they were able to actually expand their industry, expand their recurring revenues, and a lot of benefits happen. So we'll be looking at one example related to this as well. The fourth example here is a hybrid model, and this is a classic example of your printer. So here, the profit actually is made from the repeat sales of a relatively cheaper component, so the cartridge, which has a short lifespan, which is, of course, works only together with a high quality durable product like your printer. And very important to mention here, HP as a company is quite a front runner, and they have been working on circular economy since 2005. So in 2005, what they started doing, they started recovering the PET from their ink cartridges, so polyethylene terephthalate, and this was the material source for their new ink cartridges. And through this program, what happened was that all the returned ink cartridges were disassembled and separated into metals, plastics, and other materials. The plastics, what they did was they tried to process them and mix them with plastics from, say, other sources, such as used bottles, plastic hangers. And this was the source of plastic for their new cartridges. Now, impact-wise, by 2016, so over a decade later, the numbers are very impressive. HP had manufactured over 3 billion HP ink cartridges using more than 177 million pounds of recycled content. And as a result, what happened? They kept 682 million cartridges, 50 million apparel hangers, and 3.3 billion post-consumer plastic bottles out of landfills by upcycling these materials. So this was a major impact, and a lot of industry players actually, started following this example as well, in terms of HP being a trendsetter in this area. The fifth example is quite a classic long life model. So really a high quality product with long lifespan, with sales as the classic income. Our cars, right? We don't want to replace our cars every year. We want longer lasting cars as well. And this classic long life model is also being now talked about in the fashion industry, which is a bit challenging because we see fast fashion happening, and a lot of, in previous times we used to have long durable clothes, and now we have like these seasonal clothes coming up with fast fashion. So the classic long life model needs to make a comeback, and there's a lot of switch that is happening, a lot of conscious consumerism movement that are starting to put pressure on manufacturers to really supply this. Moving forward, looking at all these examples in the video that you saw, now we can actually answer this question with a big yes. Yes, circular economy is profitable, and to give you 4 or 5 ways in which this is profitable. One, it actually helps in de-risking or hedging risk, because there's always uncertainty related to commodity supply. There are price volatility of several raw materials. So when the manufacturer is shifting from selling products to services, it just enables the manufacturer to have more control points to reuse or recycle components instead of always relying on raw virgin materials. This also helps in reducing manufacturing cost. As an example, the remanufacturing of car parts is 30 to 50% less expensive than, say, producing new parts, and it generates 70% less waste. There are also new revenue streams that happen. So for instance, the refurbishment model that I mentioned, or the subscription models that I mentioned, create new recurring revenue streams for many companies. And one company's or one industry's waste can actually become like a resource for another industry. So this helps in creating these symbiotic downstream, upstream kind of revenue and models, business models as well. And of course, needless to say, it does lead to a kind of a new movement in terms of looking at new business opportunities, new markets open up, but also job creation. The potential of job creation in this industry is really high, because we're talking about, high quality, labor intensive, recycling, upcycling activities. We see a lot of entrepreneurship models and startups coming in the space of waste management and circular economy. So there is a lot of benefits in terms of really looking at how businesses should be adopting this. Very interestingly, actually, this is something that, I will share the reading link to this. So this is actually a paper that I came across very recently, just a week back on LinkedIn through the author. And basically, this paper really looks at kind of analyzing business cases of few companies to see how their organizational strategies are helping or not helping in circular economy. And they look at basically 7 core business principles of like ownership, governance, finance, network, scale, and impact. So this was something really interesting, maybe for extra reading later. To inspire you a little bit more, these are some quick examples of innovations that I was mentioning. So Fairphone, maybe you might have heard about it. So phones that help or offer the consumers the option to, pull apart your phone, the ability to purchase spare parts and repair your own phones. Really looking at the repairability movement. There is this company called Mud Jeans, where basically the consumers can buy a new pair of jeans, bring back their old jean to get a slight discount. And what happens with the return jeans is they are reprocessed into new products like sweaters and hats. Deso is a Dutch carpet company, and what they have done is they have redesigned their carpet tiles so that they can be disassembled and their yarn can actually reprocess several times for new products. On the rightmost side, you see the subscription model of this startup called Splosh Soap, which means that instead of always buying those horrible new single-use plastic bottles for your detergents, you can actually purchase a starter box subscription service, and actually inside the bottle you will find a sachet of, say, concentrated liquid, and you add your warm tap water and you can make your own detergents and cleaning agents at home. There are also a number of stores that are coming up that offer that reduce the unnecessary packaging and help you have these refill schemes or refill business models. Moving further, Mink is a 3D printer for makeup. So we have heard about 3D printing. I'm sure many of you would have heard about it. So 3D printing really helps in localizing production, reducing the waste. So this basically, it can take any image of a cosmetic and instantly transform it into a wearable cosmetic. So this really helps in relocalizing the production, saving the efforts, and really reducing the waste and the transportation costs. So something very interesting here. Another interesting company is Flutu, which basically looks at this idea or leverages the idea that if you look at the heavy machinery industry, most of it is idle 50% time. So what it does, it's kind of like an eBay of sort, which is connecting the idle machines with willing users. So any customer who wishes to use this heavy machinery for a short period of time can easily rent it instead of purchasing it. And it's kind of like a used sharing model as well. I mentioned about vehicles and how, really remanufacturing some car parts has value in reducing the waste and also the cost to the company. So Renault is actually already doing this. So it's not something in the future, it's already happening. They have a recycling scheme where they recover a lot of materials, including copper, steel, textiles, and plastics from the end of life vehicles. And they use this in the new vehicles. So currently 36% of the total mass of a newly produced Renault vehicle in Europe is made from recycled materials. And what they have now started doing, they've set up a factory in France, which basically remanufactures engines, component, and gearboxes. So that really also increases the circularity even more. Of course, car sharing model is something that we all are aware of. And, speaking about these examples, while these, give us some hope, of course, there is still a lot of systemic challenges in embedding circular economy in the world around us. There are issues of leakage, energy wastage. There are still infrastructure gaps, such as, reverse logistics not being set up, machinery needs and skilling gap in terms of upcycling and recycling industry, and the ability of how much we can recycle. And moving further, I did not want to touch the topic of plastic because it's a whole new masterclass in itself. But just to for extra reading and just for your knowledge as well, of course, plastic is an important discussion point that comes up in the topic of circular economy. And our relationship definitely with plastics needs a lot of rethinking. Year on year, millions of tons of plastic, around 8 million tons is leaking into ocean every year, and this number is very conservative number. This is increasing by far. And if you look at the past 50 years, our use of plastics has increased 20-fold. And there was a report in 2016 that mentioned that, most of the plastic packaging is used only once, and only 14% of it is collected for recycling. So even recycling, we are not doing so properly as we like to believe. And 95% of the value of plastic packaging material, which is worth, say, 80 to 120 million US dollars, is lost annually to the economy because of these leakages. And therefore, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has come up with this 6-point strategy. You can read more about it, but essentially it speaks about the importance of looking at reducing the need for single-use plastic, investing in new materials or, R&D and innovation coming in, also reuse models, how they can be applied to address the situation. So there are a number of reuse models that have come up, and the emphasis again is on the industry to shift, but also for the consumers that have started demanding demanding these kind of switching. We see a lot of right to repairability movement all across the world, where consumers are also demanding that, if I have a small component of my coffee machine broken, why do I have to replace it with a new coffee machine? Can we have access to repair cafes? Can we have access to those spare parts? So it's a very interesting movement happening. And to leave you with some inspiration, on the left side, you see this startup which made this product called Uho. And basically what it does is it's an edible and biodegradable packaging for beverages, and it is made from brown seaweed, renewable, natural resource. And this was trialed in the London Marathon in 2019. And these water capsules actually eliminated the need for 30,000 single-use plastic cups and bottles in just few hours time. So definitely the future can be plastic free. On the right side, you see this these new next gen stores coming up. This is from Lush, which is in UK, which has 850 stores worldwide. Several of them are coming up in other countries as well, localized version, where basically the concept is to sell a wide range of solid products across, hair, body, fragrance industry, which are sold naked in the store, minus the unnecessary packaging. So that's another next generation of shops that is coming up. If we had more time, I would have gone a bit further, but this is something I would like to share back as a challenge or a small assignment for those who are interested, of really looking at, if you were to redesign a product or a service, or look at an industry of making it circular, what will you do and how will you do that? So these are 3 or 4 guiding questions or steps just to trigger your thinking a little bit on how circularity can be adopted in industries. I do have a list of post-session reading guide for you all, video library as well. And recently I was in Antarctica just last month. So it's the first cohort that I'm speaking to about this. Probably there'll be another session around this, and a lot of learnings around how rapidly our world is changing. Climate change is impacting the wildlife and our ecosystem really fast. So I have some material, and if people are interested to know more about this expedition and what we learned there, happy to share more resources. And thank you. And there will soon be a podcast also coming up on the topic of circular economy, because we want to speak more about it and bring in practical examples and case studies of what people can do to become more circular. So more on that later. But I will now pause for questions and discussion. And thank you for being patient.
Wow, thank you so much, Rozita. What an incredible presentation. Really fantastic. Danielle mentions in the chat that there's an update on Uho.
Okay.
Danielle, do you want to tell us about that? Do you mind? Putting you on the spot, Danielle, sorry about that.
Yes, they've just rebranded and shifted directions a bit. I think that like the water balls proved a bit impractical, and that wanted to make like a larger commitment to more sustainable plastic free packaging across the board. They're calling themselves NotPla now.
Okay.
But just to update, I do have a question though.
Sure. Thanks for that update though. Yeah.
It does seem like I'm very excited about the circular economy. I would love nothing more than to go full donut. And in my group project right now, actually doing a deep dive on like exactly this topic, like e-waste and, just like waste reprocessing in general. And it seems like there's just a lot of greenwashing. And I was like looking particularly at this company today, TerraCycle. They are making a lot of like brand partnerships to recycle everything from your Taco Bell sauce packets to like starting a plastic loop economy thing with Walgreens and Walmart. But they're also being sued by the beach cleanup people. And just thinking about it practically, like you can't save the world recycling the sauce packets from Taco Bell for a month. So I guess, I don't know, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about greenwashing and how to increase the system with more full fidelity, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Thanks for that. I think, Daniel, you've captured what's happening in our world right now pretty well. So a couple of things here, because that is something that I'm also very consciously aware of. And during my time spent in private sector, looking at circular economy strategies, we were really looking at, which are the real companies and what goes into making a business more strategically circular. So the most important part is to really invest in design and research and development, R&D. It cannot be undermined. So what we've seen in our experience is that those companies who actually have invested and have dedicated functions behind and not just ESG compliance or reports published do really well. For instance, to give you an example of where I worked in Philips, there was a strict KPI that 15% of the products and revenue, like products and services, the revenue should come from circular products and services. And they had defined, what means a circular product and service. They did achieve this target in 2020, and it was very challenging, by the way, because some of the businesses were not very open towards going circular, even though it came from the top management in terms of the announcements. And now they actually, because they had invested since 9 or 10 years in a proper R&D function and the design team that brings in this modularity in the products and appliances, it worked, but it's a continuous effort. And what worked in their favor was that fortunately they did earn profit from it, which encouraged the business and the stakeholders. So they started actually taking back the big MRI machines that they put into the market. It's a health tech company now. They take it back, they actually refurbish, and they have like a new program called Diamond Select program for hospitals who cannot afford like the new machines. They get like a slight discount to get the refurbished version. And through this, they were able to bring in a new recurring stream, which couldn't have existed if they were just supplying new machines. So because they were able to show new business opportunities coming in, they were able to have these proof points going in. Similarly, for their appliances like the vacuum cleaner and the coffee machine, they have slowly started increasing the percentage of recycled material that they put in. So really reducing the need for virgin material, though that's not the best way, because in general, we should not be using plastic at all, but till we find that material or till we find a better resource for that appliance, especially the ones that heat up, that require a certain quality of food grade standard, that was the best option. So I guess these are some of the things you need to really watch out for and also call out. And I see a lot of calling out happening, thankfully, on this topic. Another quick example, because you mentioned about this, there's this, you might be seeing all these interesting brands like Nike and so many other people, a lot of clothing brands who are saying that, we will be using recycled ocean plastic in our new sustainable line. Now, actually, that is not a very good thing, because what happens is that even through our textile or clothes, when we put it in washing machines, microplastics are released. So you're actually using the recycled plastic from the oceans, but then from your dresses and stuff, it's from the drain of your washing machine, it's still going into the ocean. So it's also very important to know where we can use recycled plastic and where actually we shouldn't use. In this case, now there's a study, and I'll share that blog with you, that why recycling ocean plastics to make your clothes is not a great idea, even if your intention is good. So there are a couple of those things. I see Josh's hand is up, so maybe over to you.
Thank you, Rozita. I'm actually in the same group as Danielle for this project. But we're also doing it on circular economy, and thus I chose to join the session tonight. And I think something that I find quite interesting is when we look at the potential of circularity, just in terms of, for instance, the electronics industry, from washing machines, fridges, these various products and the emissions associated with refrigerant gases. And I suppose what I would kind of be interested in learning more about is obviously the virgin material, metals, precious metals, all the stuff that goes into these products. There's a massive amount of emissions associated with mining these materials, transport, heating and production and all that sort of thing. What is the potential of circularity to reduce? The emissions reduction must be massive if we went circular for a lot of these products that we're producing. So I guess my question is just what is the potential in terms of emission reductions?
So like I mentioned, like my source for this is really looking at the circularity gap report, because that's the one that does like a census of the world and gives a statistic on how much circular we are, sadly only 8.6%. So if you really look a little bit deep into that report, there are a number of solutions that they have pitched, so around 21 solutions, which can help in doubling the current rate and not cutting the emissions by, like, say, I'm saying 70 to 80%, but by a good 40%. And they have solutions centered around 6 areas. So one is like housing, one is mobility, nutrition. They even have consumables and health. So based on the impact of each of these industries, they have kind of, how do you say, ranked or prioritize the sectors where action will be needed the most. So maybe that's something to look at, but I can share more material on that because that's quite a deep dive. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful.
I see Edmund. Do you want to come in?
Yeah. Hi, Rozita. Thanks very much. Got 2 or 3 sort of comments and questions wrapped up together a little bit. In getting the circular economy to really work, is it all about, which I think you were really focusing on, is encouraging these companies that it's beneficial, profitable, easier, more efficient for them to do this? But if we are going to actually get any real action that's going to have any real effect in planetary terms, is it about policy made by government and targets? And then I suppose the third bit of what I wanted to say, and if it is about policy and targets, it's something I was talking about on Wednesday and Thursday. I was at the Financial Times event in London on moral money, on investment into sustainability and things. And it drove me mad that all these people from developed economies and from massive international corporations kept talking about their targets to get to net zero 2050 and forgetting the fact that the scientists that I work with say that's absolutely rubbish, that it'll never help us anyway. But even the 2050 net zero targets that were set 7 years ago under the Paris Accord were set for the entire global economy. And if the most developed companies, Philips, for instance, that you've just been talking about, but Unilever, Procter & Gamble, whoever it would be, and the most developed economies still go for these way out targets, they're never going to get the circularity in place at the kind of levels they need to do it. So do we need to, so I'm sort of answering my own question, but giving a comment, in order to up the game on getting circularity in at the right levels, do we need to have a new communication on 2050 net zero for advanced economies and advanced businesses in order for them to realize what they have to do and the speed they have to do it because of their advantages currently?
Right.
Gosh, that was a long question. Did it make sense?
Yes, it does. It does a lot. And thanks for that. So, I mean, okay. So, yes, first of all, legislation does play a very important role, and actually we are seeing the impacts of it already. So 2 examples to give you. The European Union, it has a whole package and this whole framework on circular economy. Before it launched that, you didn't see this kind of movement happening in the business and civil society. After they have launched, and it's been quite some time since they have been launching these strict guidelines with, targets and pathways in place. Of course, a lot of them are not still mandatory, which is again another whole thing. Some of them is voluntary, but because of that, when I was in Netherlands and when I was studying and researching this topic, I saw a great traction. So what you see there is that the city, from the municipality to the businesses to the civil society, everybody is moving in one direction because they have this framework or guiding principle. To give you an example, there are neighborhoods that are coming on the concept of circular. The municipality, Amsterdam municipality, has already set a target, and by 2030, or I believe 2040, they have set up a certain target to go circular. And they have also defined what areas does it mean to be, because there's a construction field, like I said, there's a lot that happens in emissions in the transport sector. Also, the food waste is really increasing as well. So they have come up with these outline criteria. What I liked, what worked there, was that because of that lobbying movement, and of course, nothing was immediate, it all took time. Now we see a movement where it's not only the business players who are doing it, civil society are coming up. There are institutes like Circle Economy, the producer of this report, who's based in Amsterdam, Metabolic, an organization that is actually working with the community to come up with these floating neighborhoods and reclaiming certain space to utilize the materials instead of again bringing in new construction materials. To give you an example from India, where I'm coming in, different story altogether. We have something called the Extended Producer Responsibility EPR guideline come in only now. So it's only been few years since this came up. Before that, this was a mess. Even basic collection practices of waste were lacking. Now, since this EPR legislation has come up, there was a 3-year review or something that was done. We already see a lot of positive movement in terms of a lot of startups as well as municipalities setting up collection centers, which is, I think, a very basic thing, but actually took us that legislation to bring it legally. Now there is a mandate actually on the industry and the businesses to buy a certain percentage from the vendors, the recycled plastic component. So there are these things that are happening at the micro level as well as a result of this guideline or legislation. So I do believe in the power of it. In our country, especially, like the carrot and stick model, a stick works much more better. We've been giving carrots and incentives, but not everybody is driven towards it. Another quick one on this, not to close the topic, but just to close this question, it's the incentives are very important to have. Philips wouldn't have, increased this target from 15% to 25% of circular revenue and service had they not achieved in 2020, or had they not seen those nice profit margins from the health tech industry of people buying refurbished item or people showing faith in recycled products. Similarly, even within that ecosystem, it was so complicated. For instance, in the European markets, people, the consumers, were willing to buy, say, second-hand or refurbished. If you go to North America market or some other, cultures, there people want to own new products. They refuse to, purchase. So we saw a lot of difference in how North America businesses were running, and they were slightly closed. They were like, sorry, we have a sales competition going on. We got to beat the Siemens and GE. Whereas, say, Germany market was much more interested in reducing their bottom line cost, and really, they had consumers who wanted those products. So they had found out a way. So I feel culturally also as consumers, we need to change and also demand. And I feel like there is no single bullet. We need to act at all the levels, including individual level as well.
Sorry, do you mind sorry to the next person who wanted to ask a question, but just a quick qualification on it. You mentioned about neighborhoods going circular. And I don't know whether if you could comment now, or alternatively send me something. In our town in the UK, so 10,000 people, we've declared a climate emergency and set a 2030 target for the whole parish, so for the whole town. There's 126 higher local governments in the UK that have also set 2030 targets. I don't suppose any of them have set targets to make their local town or city go circular. But how do you do that? I mean, how could we, as 10,000 people, create a circular local economy?
Right. I will share more material. There's a case study from a few neighborhoods that was studied in Netherlands, and also from the recent donut economy model. I will be happy to share that with you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Just looking if I missed anything, Greg, from the chat or?
Not from the chat, but it looks like Riddhi, is it?
Yes, Riddhi,
yes.
Yes. Hi, Rozita. Actually, you touched upon my question a little bit in your previous answer. I was wanting to ask more about the EPR guidelines that have come up in India. These guidelines have kind of been in place in a few other economies, and we're kind of just sort of starting to adopt those. So I wanted to understand, if there's any sort of past track record to show how much this has kind of really helped or moved the needle. B, another thing that I'm sort of coming across is that there is kind of no data on, especially on plastics, at least in India. I mean, the kind of latest data is from all the way back in 2015. And a lot of the producers are also kind of using EPR credits instead of actually, procuring the material and using recycled material in their production processes. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, because to me that kind of feels like a bit of a cop-out.
Right. So I'll share with you. I'll share with you a little slightly more India-based model as well to kind of relate to the ecosystem. But this example actually comes from UNDP, one of our projects that we are running since the past 4 years, where we are working with Coca-Cola, so Hindustan Unilever, and to really set up these material recovery centers. And their interest in it is to get the EPR certificate. which they have to get as part of legislation. Our interest as development practitioners is to smartly play that incentive, and we have used their money to set up these recovery centers in 36 cities. So we actually were able to set up a model over the last 4 years, where in 36 cities in different states of India, we established around 20 plus material recovery centers, and these are called Swachhata Kendras. And there we have institutionalized rack pickers, which means that they are able to come in, they're able to work in terms of baling and compressing and sort these plastics and then sell it to the vendors and earn from it directly. So it's a little bit of a micro livelihood model that is coming up. Right now, we are looking at how to make it sustainable beyond the project life cycle when the funding ends or Coca-Cola's interest wears down. But these centers are now becoming hubs. Also, from an innovation point of view, we are now looking at how these materials once collected. The issue we are facing, to be honest, is to find vendors or new markets for it. So we have now the problem of collected waste, right? But then sometimes because of the volatile fluctuations of the rates of plastic, as you know, oil industry and the current war and a lot of other things that happen, they don't get the same or uniform price for that much effort and collection. And sometimes this collected, plastic, we don't have as many upcyclers as we may want. Because recycling is not the only thing. We want somebody to make products out of it. We are making, in one of the cities in Hyderabad, construction tiles and construction bricks out of it. People have shown that furniture can be made out of it. Those park benches and stuff, they have established models and a model kind of a place where you can see the products. But again, to scale up that innovation is where we are kind of stuck in, to share with you very candidly. So I'll be able to share more material with you from that project, but that's something which is, our own learning through this journey of 4 years on how this model works out. And of course, there are loopholes in EPR. Of course, greenwashers are still there. I can say that candidly, and they will always be there. But I think it's about finding that carrot, right? And sometimes using it as a stick as well through legislation, but they have to do it. They now don't have any choice for that EPR. They have to invest in it. But how do we use that investment as development practitioners or as organizations? That's where we need the great minds, really. Yeah. So not sure if I've surely answered. It's more like a practitioner's dilemma I'm sharing, but happy to share more examples.
Yeah, and sorry, I know we're kind of close on time, but one more thing that I was also wondering on was how pricing mechanisms are working for sort of EPR credit. So if you had any material that you could share on that
Sure.
as well.
I will check that with my colleagues. I'm sure I'll be able to find something. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Anyone else? Maybe a quick first question. And of course, you can send me more questions later. I'll be sharing my details. Yes.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about incentives for either via offsets or whatever, incentives that have worked for helping the developing world set up, fund and set up the formalization of kind of informal trash collection and recycling, etc.?
Wow, that's $1 million question. If we are able to crack that, everything happens. But actually, Daniel, from my experience, what I've seen is I've started believing in the space between, it's not in the hand of public sector entirely. It's not in the hand of private sector entirely. What we are seeing, at least in our country, the innovation and entrepreneurship movement is really helping it. To give you a very quick example, I don't know if it's the right example to give, but I'm going to attempt it. So the big companies, right, Unilever, right, they have been practitioners and policy think tanks since decades. They've been telling them to switch to, if they, they can right now switch to a good material instead of coming up with those sachets or single-use plastic bottles, but they are not, for a reason, because of the economics or how the businesses work. Now, what happened? A bunch of startups started mushrooming here in India, and I'm sure there are similar ones outside, which started coming up with these refill stations. They started coming up with these very interesting packaging innovations. We are seeing a lot of packaging innovations coming up. These are still the small fish, right? Not big enough to make an impact, but big enough to threaten the big fish. And what we saw was that because of these startups that started coming up suddenly, like last year, Unilever announced finally that they will come up with this, they will try out this refill station. So now they have started coming up with this refill station. They did one pilot in Mumbai where they kind of like invited their consumers to bring in their bottles and, do their refills. It was very interesting because from the eye that I look at it, I found it very positive because since years they could have done it. But now, because they see a lot of competition coming up in terms of these startups, and these are growing really fast, some of them, not all of them, of course, succeed, but some of them are kind of like, testing at scale. They're getting government funding, they're getting support from, say, UN agencies and others. And maybe something switched there, and they did launch that. So I feel that innovation like that power of disruption, right, that comes from an innovation. You start small, but it can make a difference. Of course, there are many times that these small startups also get crushed by the big players. That does happen. But I'm very much optimistic about this space because we have literally tried out all the other spaces, right, since so many decades. So I'm like, let's try out this as well, right?
Cool, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Rozita, very much. Fabulous talk, and thanks all for your great questions. Rozita, there are a number of people requesting links and sources and more information. Some people gave their email addresses, but hopefully we could just share with everyone on Slack.
Sure. I'll be able to share all the material. If you don't find it, if there's a gap, just send me an email. I'm very prompt as well. If I forget something, happy to share that transparently. But I have all this material and I'll be happy to share more, like if there are specific questions. It's a big topic. This was just a small, peekaboo into the topic. But I hope that you guys are able to read a little bit more and, get a deep dive, and happy to have more discussions later on. Yes, Dhanashri, yes.
Also would like to quickly understand a little bit about your Antarctica expedition, if that's possible.
For those who can stay back, I don't know, Greg, if you're closing this meeting link, I'm happy to share that as well, but it's a big topic and session. But essentially, this was a group of 150 people selected, and we went on this expedition in March. It was led by Sir Robert Swan, who was the first person to walk North Pole and South Pole. And he started this foundation called 2041 Foundation to speak about the Antarctica Treaty and its protection. So we did have like a lot of learnings. There are some links related to that, which is there in the slide deck that will come to you. So you can read all about it there as well. But it does need a separate session. So I'm on the spree of doing more sharing sessions because I came back only in April, but yeah, happy to discuss more.
Sounds amazing. Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much. Thank you everyone for coming and for your questions. And Rozita, again, fabulous. We really appreciate it. Thanks all. Take care.
Thanks so much. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.